47 seconds. That's all it took to steal $107 million from the most dangerous cartel in Mexico. 47 seconds when the motion sensors went dark, when the alarms reset, when a broke chemistry student named Antonio Mendez walked into a fortress and walked out a ghost. You think you know desperation? Try owing $200,000 in student loans with a chemistry degree that's worth less than the paper it's printed on. Try watching your immigrant parents work themselves to death while you can't even get a job at CVS. Try being so smart that you can cook crystal meth better than anyone in Florida, but so broke you're eating ramen for the third week straight. That was Antonio in 2018. 34 years old, brilliant, and completely screwed. But here's what nobody saw coming. While the Hermanos del Sol cartel thought they were hiring another desperate cook, Antonio was studying them, learning their patterns, memorizing their security protocols, counting their money. And when he found that 47-second window, that tiny gap in their million-dollar security system, he didn't just see an opportunity. He saw revenge against a world that had thrown him away. You're about to hear how a 47-second flaw turned a broke chemist into the cartel's worst nightmare. If you don't subscribe right now, just remember this. Someone else will, and they'll know exactly how the FBI got outplayed while you're still stuck scrolling. Don't be the clueless one. Smash subscribe or admit it in the comments. Because what Antonio did next didn't just break every rule in the criminal playbook. It rewrote them. On August 15, 2018, while most of Florida slept, 3 modified trucks pulled up to a warehouse in Lakeland. No masks. No guns. No dramatic heist movie nonsense. Just Antonio, 2 accomplices, and a plan so simple it was genius. They had 20 minutes to pull off the impossible. 20 minutes to outsmart a cartel that had never been robbed. 20 minutes to steal more money than most people see in 10 lifetimes. The warehouse held cash from drug operations across the entire Southeast. Money that was supposed to be untouchable. Protected by armed guards, motion sensors, pressure plates, and enough firepower to level a city block. But Antonio had discovered something the cartel's security experts missed. Every night at 2:47 a.m., the system performed a reset cycle. 47 seconds when the motion detectors went offline. 47 seconds when a man with nothing left to lose could become a legend. The cartel never saw it coming. The FBI couldn't track him down. And by the time anyone realized what had happened, Antonio Mendez had already become the ghost of Polk County, the man who proved that sometimes the smartest person in the room isn't the one with the biggest gun. But stealing from a cartel is just the beginning. Because now, everyone wants him dead. Let me tell you who Antonio really was before he became a ghost. Because understanding how someone falls this far means understanding how easily it could happen to anyone. Roberto Mendez came to America in 1982 with $12 and a promise to his pregnant wife. He'd make it work. He'd give their son everything Cuba couldn't. So he took a job at a steel factory in Tampa, working 16-hour shifts until his hands bled and his back screamed. Isabella cleaned office buildings at night. Every night. While other mothers tucked their kids into bed, she was emptying trash cans and scrubbing floors so Antonio could have school supplies, could have clothes that fit, could have a shot at something better. They never complained. Not once. When Antonio brought home A's in chemistry, Roberto would show the report card to everyone at the factory. When Antonio got accepted to the University of Florida with a partial scholarship, Isabella cried for 3 days straight. You know what kills me about this story? Antonio was brilliant. Not just smart, brilliant. His organic chemistry professor said he was the best student he'd seen in 20 years. Companies were already sniffing around, talking about PhD programs, research positions, maybe even pharmaceutical development. The American dream was working exactly like it was supposed to. Until 2008 happened. You remember 2008? When the economy collapsed and took everyone's future with it. Antonio was supposed to graduate into a world of opportunities. Instead, he graduated into unemployment lines and rejection letters. His parents had sacrificed everything. Literally everything. Roberto's back was shot from decades of factory work. Isabella had developed arthritis in her hands from scrubbing floors. They'd given their bodies to give Antonio a chance, and now that chance was evaporating. Student loans don't care about economic crashes. They want their money whether you can find work or not. 200,000 in debt, no job prospects, watching his parents' health decline while he couldn't even pay for groceries. That's when desperation starts talking. Antonio's first meth lab wasn't in some abandoned warehouse. It was in a storage unit he could barely afford, using equipment he'd borrowed from the university before they figured out what he was doing. He told himself it was temporary. Just until something better came along. Just until he could pay down some debt. But here's the thing about chemistry. If you're good at it, you're really good at it. Antonio's product was pure, clean, consistent. Word got around fast. Within 6 months, he was making more money cooking meth than any legitimate job would have paid him. Within a year, he was supplying half the dealers in Tampa. His parents thought he'd finally found work in a private lab. He let them believe it. You want to know the exact moment Antonio Mendez became dangerous? It wasn't when he started cooking. It wasn't when he moved to the backwoods of Polk County and set up a real operation. It was when he realized he was smarter than everyone else in the game. The dealers who bought from him. High school dropouts who couldn't balance a checkbook. The competition. Tweakers using recipes they found online, producing garbage that barely qualified as meth. The police. Following the same tired playbook they'd used for 20 years. Antonio had spent 4 years studying molecular structures, reaction kinetics, and analytical chemistry. He understood things at a level none of these people could even comprehend. He wasn't just cooking drugs, he was engineering them. That realization changed everything. Because once you know you're the smartest person in the room, once you see how sloppy and predictable everyone else is, ambition starts growing. By 2017, Antonio was running the most sophisticated meth operation in Central Florida. Clean labs, efficient distribution, zero law enforcement heat. He'd taken his parents' sacrifice, his education, his natural talent, and turned it into something they'd never imagined. But even that wasn't enough. Because when you're that smart, when you've fallen that far, when you've already crossed every line that matters, why stop at being just another drug dealer? Why not take on a cartel? February 2018. Antonio's running his operation smooth as silk when 2 men in expensive suits walk into Mel's Diner on Highway 27. They order coffee and apple pie like tourists, but their eyes are scanning exits, counting civilians, measuring threats. Ricardo Fuentes and Carlos Navarro. Hermanos del Sol Cartel. And they're here for Antonio. The Hermanos del Sol weren't your typical drug dealers. These guys controlled trafficking routes from Mexico to Miami, Jacksonville to Tampa. Their motto was simple: join us or disappear. They'd been expanding into Florida for months, swallowing up local operations one by one. Fuentes slides into the booth across from Antonio like they're old friends. Smiles like a shark. You make good product, amigo. Very good. Maybe too good for a small-time operation. That's when Antonio knows he's screwed. Because when a cartel notices you, you've got exactly 2 choices: work for them or die. There's no third option. No negotiation. No walking away. We have a proposal, Fuentes continues, cutting his pie with surgical precision. Triple your current volume. Exclusive contract. Very generous terms. Generous terms. Right. Like generous meant anything when they owned you completely. But here's where Antonio was different from every other small-time cook who'd sat in this exact booth, hearing this exact speech. While Fuentes talked, while Navarro stared him down, while most people would be calculating how fast they could run, Antonio was calculating something else entirely. He was studying them, learning their patterns, watching how they moved, how they thought, how they operated. Because even as he nodded and agreed and played the grateful little chemist who just won the criminal lottery, his mind was already working on a completely different problem. This is where most people tap out. They think they'd never cave to the cartel. But let me be blunt, if you don't even have the nerve to subscribe, how would you survive a threat like Fuentes? Be honest. Hit subscribe or head to the comments and explain why you'd fold faster than Antonio ever did. Of course, senor, Antonio said, shaking Fuentes' hand. I'm honored to work with such a professional organization. Professional organization. That's what you call murderers when they're sitting 3 feet away from you. The meeting lasted 45 minutes. They outlined production schedules, delivery methods, payment structures. Everything sounded reasonable until you realized you'd just signed your life away. One mistake, one missed shipment, one moment of hesitation, and you joined the list of people who'd simply vanished. But Antonio walked out of that diner with something more valuable than fear. He had information. He knew their faces, their voices, their mannerisms. He'd seen how they operated, how they thought, how confident they were in their own power. Most importantly, he'd confirmed what he'd suspected all along. They were smart, but they weren't smarter than him. That night, he made 2 phone calls. First to Miguel Santos, his childhood friend who'd done 3 tours in Afghanistan and knew how to handle pressure. Second to Catherine Monroe, Kit, a former military explosives expert who'd been dishonorably discharged for reasons she'd never fully explained. "I need people I can trust," he told them both. "And I need them for something bigger than cooking meth." Because Antonio had just realized something that would change everything. If you're going to work for a cartel, why not own one instead? For 3 months, Antonio played the perfect employee. Delivered on time, kept his mouth shut, smiled when Fuentes patted him on the shoulder like a good dog. But every delivery to the Lakeland warehouse was a reconnaissance mission. The Hermanos del Sol had turned an old furniture distribution center into their southeast hub. From the outside, it looked dead, broken windows, weeds growing through the parking lot, the kind of place teenagers would dare each other to explore. Inside was a different story. Motion sensors covering every angle. Pressure plates under the floors. Armed guards rotating in 4-hour shifts. And somewhere in the back, behind 3 separate locked doors, sat more cash than most banks held. Miguel thought Antonio had lost his mind. "You want to rob a cartel fortress? Are you high on your own product?" But Kit was intrigued. Military training had taught her to see weaknesses where others saw strength. "Every system has flaws," she said, studying the building schematics Antonio had sketched from memory. "Question is whether we can find them before they find us." The breakthrough came during Antonio's 7th delivery. While Fuentes counted product in the front office, Antonio noticed something. At exactly 2:47 a.m., all the motion sensor lights blinked off simultaneously. For exactly 47 seconds. Then they came back online. System reset. Every security consultant's nightmare and every thief's dream. Those 47 seconds happened because the warehouse used a military-grade system designed for maximum coverage. But maximum coverage requires maximum power, and maximum power generates heat. So every night, the system performed an automatic cooling cycle, shutting down motion detection while thermal regulators prevented overheating. 47 seconds when the entire building's motion sensors went dark. Kit confirmed it during her own surveillance. She'd positioned herself 3 blocks away with military-grade optics, timing the reset cycle for 2 weeks straight. Always the same. 2:47 a.m. 47 seconds. Reliable as sunrise. "It's possible," she admitted. "Barely. But we'd need to know the exact layout, timing, and guard rotation. One mistake and we're all dead." That's when Antonio showed them what he'd really been doing during those 3 months. Floor plans. Guard schedules. Camera positions. Safe combinations. He'd memorized everything. While pretending to be their loyal cook, he'd been mapping every inch of their operation. "The main vault is here," he explained, pointing to his hand-drawn blueprint. 2 guards, but they rotate out at 2:30 a.m. The money-counting room is adjacent. That's where they keep the weekly collections before transport. Miguel still wasn't convinced. "Even if we get in, how do we get out? They'll know it was us within hours." "No," Antonio said. "They'll know someone hit them. But they won't know who. Because we're going to make it look like their own people did it." The plan was insane in its simplicity. Use stolen cartel vehicles, ones already cleared for warehouse access. Enter during the guard rotation gap. Navigate by memory in complete darkness. Load the cache during the 47-second window. Exit before the sensors came back online. Leave evidence pointing to an inside job. Let the cartel tear itself apart looking for traitors. But planning a heist and executing one are completely different things. The stress was eating all of them alive. Miguel started drinking. Kit became paranoid, checking her apartment for surveillance devices 3 times a day. Antonio stopped sleeping entirely. The weight of what they were planning, robbing the most dangerous criminal organization in North America, was crushing. These weren't bank robbers or petty thieves. The Hermanos del Sol had a reputation for making examples. Entire families disappeared when someone crossed them. "Maybe we should call it off," Miguel said one night, hands shaking as he lit his 4th cigarette in 10 minutes. But Antonio was too far gone. He'd spent months watching Fuentes treat him like property, watching the cartel make millions while he got table scraps, watching them laugh about the stupid locals who did their dirty work. "They think we're nothing," he said. "They think we're too scared, too stupid, too weak to touch them." He looked at both of them, his childhood friend and the military expert who'd become the closest thing to family he had. Time to prove them wrong. August 15th, 2018. 11:47 p.m. 3 modified pickup trucks sit in a Walmart parking lot 12 miles from the warehouse. Each truck has been stolen from cartel operations over the past month. Vehicles already cleared for warehouse access, their theft blamed on rival gangs. Antonio checks his watch. Miguel loads bolt cutters into the first truck. Kit runs through the timing one final time. In at 2:47. Sensors down for 47 seconds. Out by 3:15 before the next guard rotation. Nobody talks about what happens if they're wrong about any of this. 12:30 a.m. They drive separately to staging positions around the warehouse. Antonio parks behind an abandoned gas station with a clear view of the facility. His heart is hammering so hard he can feel it in his throat. The warehouse looks exactly like it has for months. 2 guards visible through the front windows. Security lights sweeping the perimeter in predictable patterns. Everything normal. Everything routine. 1:45 a.m. Kit's voice crackles through the stolen radio. Guards just rotated. New shift settling in. Antonio watches through binoculars as the night crew takes their positions. These guards don't know they're about to become part of criminal history. They're just doing their jobs, protecting money that isn't even theirs. 2:30 a.m. Guard rotation. The night shift heads to the break room for coffee and cigarettes. 15 minutes of minimal coverage. This is when they have to move. 2:35 a.m. 3 trucks pull into the warehouse parking lot using service roads, headlights off. They've practiced this approach 17 times. Every turn, every stop, every parking position memorized. The warehouse looms above them like a tomb. Security cameras track their movement, but the stolen vehicles trigger no alarms. As far as the system knows, these are routine deliveries. 2:46 a.m. Antonio's hands are shaking as he cuts the rear entrance lock. 1 minute until the sensors reset. Miguel and Kit position themselves at predetermined entry points. Kit whispers into her radio, 60 seconds to window. The sound of Antonio's heartbeat drowns out everything else. This is the moment. Cross this threshold and there's no going back. Stay here and remain nobody forever. 2:47 a.m. exactly. Every motion sensor light in the building blinks off simultaneously. We're dark, Kit breathes. 47 seconds starting now. They move like ghosts through corridors Antonio has memorized down to the inch. Left turn, 30 feet, right turn, 20 feet, double doors leading to the counting room. Complete darkness except for the glow of exit signs. Miguel's breathing sounds like thunder in the silence. Every footstep seems to echo forever. Kit moves with military precision, but even she can't mask the sound of their equipment. 15 seconds gone. 32 remaining. The counting room door opens to reveal something from a fever dream. Stacks of cash covering 3 industrial tables. Hundreds spread across counting machines. Bundles of bills sorted by denomination, by origin, by destination. $107 million in untraceable currency, sitting under fluorescent lights like merchandise in a store. Holy shit, Miguel whispers. No talking, Antonio hisses. Move. They load cash with mechanical efficiency. Garbage bags, duffel bags, anything that can hold money. The bills are mostly hundreds and fifties. Dense, compact, surprisingly heavy. 27 seconds gone. 20 remaining. Kit guards the door while Antonio and Miguel work. The cash keeps coming. More money than they've ever seen. More money than most people see in lifetimes. 35 seconds. 12 remaining. Time, Kit calls. They're still loading when the motion sensors come back online. Still moving when the security lights return. Still breathing when the alarms don't sound. Because they're already supposed to be here. The stolen vehicles, the forged access codes, the inside knowledge, everything working exactly as planned. 3 minutes later, they're loading the last bags into trucks. 7 minutes after that, they're driving away on separate routes toward separate safe houses. 20 minutes. That's all it took to change everything. What's stopping you from taking 2 seconds to subscribe? Don't be the viewer who vanishes like that $107 million. Gone, forgotten, irrelevant. Hit subscribe now, or go drop your excuse in the comments where we'll all see it. By 4 a.m., Antonio Mendez had become something that didn't exist an hour earlier. Not just a thief. Not just a criminal. He'd become a legend. Because stealing from a cartel isn't just robbery. It's a declaration of war. And Antonio had just fired the first shot in a conflict that would consume everything he'd ever known. The money was gone. The warehouse was empty. And somewhere in the Florida night, a ghost was born. 6:23 a.m. Fuentes discovers the empty counting room and throws up in the parking lot. By 7 a.m., he's on a secure line to Mexico, explaining to El Lobo how someone walked away with $107 million. El Lobo's response is swift and terrifying. He dispatches La Sombra, his most feared enforcer, to Florida with orders that everyone in the organization understands. Recover the money or send a message so brutal that nobody ever tries this again. La Sombra arrives in Miami that same night. Real name unknown. Background classified. The only thing certain about him is that people who cross the Hermanos del Sol tend to disappear permanently after he gets involved. His first move? Fuentes and Navarro simply vanish. Their cars found abandoned. Their homes empty. Their families relocated for their own protection. The message to everyone else: this is what happens when you fail El Lobo. Meanwhile, 600 miles north in Tampa, FBI Special Agent Linda Kowalski is staring at the largest theft from a criminal organization in Florida history. 3 years tracking cartel activity, and now someone had done the impossible. Her first instinct? This was a rival cartel operation. Had to be. No local crew had the resources, intelligence, or sheer audacity to hit the Hermanos del Sol. So she starts pulling files on every criminal organization with connections to Mexico. She's looking in completely the wrong direction. Which is exactly what Antonio counted on. Because while La Sombra hunts ghosts and Kowalski chases shadows, Antonio Mendez is busy becoming Gabriel Torres, successful Florida businessman and pillar of the community. The transformation was months in the planning. False documents prepared by the same forgers who helped cartel money laundering. Credit history established through cryptocurrency conversions. Background story supported by legitimate business investments. Gabriel Torres bought a chain of car washes across Central Florida. Cash-intensive businesses perfect for laundering stolen money. He purchased 3 restaurants in Tampa, 2 construction companies in Orlando, and a small shipping firm in Jacksonville. On paper, Gabriel Torres was everything Antonio Mendez never could be. Wealthy, successful, legitimate. The kind of person who wrote checks to charity and got his name in the local business journal. But here's the genius of Antonio's misdirection strategy. While everyone searched for the thieves, he became the victim. La Sombra raids Antonio's old lab in Polk County and finds exactly what Antonio wanted him to find: evidence of a struggle. Signs of hasty evacuation. Bloodstains that DNA testing would confirm belonged to Antonio Mendez. The obvious conclusion? Antonio had been kidnapped, tortured for information about warehouse security, then eliminated. His body would never be found because that's how cartels handle loose ends. Kowalski reaches the same conclusion from a different angle. Her investigation into chemical supply purchases leads her to Antonio's former operation. When she finds the abandoned lab, the evidence suggests cartel retaliation against a local cook who might have witnessed something he shouldn't have. Both hunters following trails that lead nowhere. Both convinced they understand what happened. Both completely wrong. Antonio used brilliance to build an empire. You can't even use yours to hit a red button? If you've made it this far and still haven't subscribed, it's not laziness, it's fear. Own it. Subscribe now. Or leave a comment confessing you're scared of stories this powerful. While La Sombra tears apart Florida's criminal underworld looking for phantoms, Gabriel Torres is hosting charity dinners and cutting ribbons at business openings. While Kowalski builds profiles of missing persons and cartel victims, Gabriel Torres is expanding his legitimate empire with stolen money nobody can trace. The most beautiful part? Both investigations actually help Antonio's plan. La Sombra's brutal hunt creates so much chaos in Florida's drug trade that smaller operations collapse or flee the state. Perfect opportunity for someone with resources and intelligence to fill the vacuum. Kowalski's FBI investigation puts pressure on every cartel operation in the southeast. The Hermanos del Sol start pulling back, focusing on survival instead of expansion. Another opportunity for the right person to claim abandoned territory. By October 2018, 2 months after the heist, Antonio had achieved something unprecedented in criminal history. He'd stolen a fortune from the world's most dangerous cartel, convinced them he was dead, misdirected federal law enforcement, and used the chaos to build a legitimate business empire. La Sombra was hunting a ghost. Kowalski was investigating a victim. And Gabriel Torres was becoming the most powerful criminal Florida had ever seen. None of them realized they were all looking for the same man. By January 2019, Gabriel Torres wasn't just laundering stolen money anymore. He was building something that had never existed, a criminal empire run like a Fortune 500 company. The transformation from desperate thief to criminal CEO started with recruitment. Antonio needed specialists, not street thugs. People with skills, education, and most importantly, something to lose. Rebecca Chen was first. Former Wall Street trader who'd lost everything in an insider trading scandal. Brilliant with financial instruments, desperate for a second chance, and morally flexible enough to not ask questions about where the startup capital came from. I handle cryptocurrency exchanges, offshore accounts, and investment portfolios, she told people at cocktail parties. All true. She just didn't mention that the investments were drug profits and the exchanges were money laundering operations. Dr. Martin Kozlov came next. Ex-DEA chemist who'd been fired for selling evidence from drug raids. His knowledge of federal investigation techniques made him invaluable for staying ahead of law enforcement. His chemistry background made him perfect for product development. We're not just cooking meth anymore, Antonio explained during their first meeting. We're engineering it. Creating compounds that are harder to detect, more addictive, more profitable. Tyler Nash was the final piece. Cybersecurity expert who'd been blacklisted from legitimate tech companies for hacking government databases. He built the Ghost Network's communication system, encrypted channels that made their operations invisible to surveillance. Each specialist brought something Antonio couldn't provide alone. Rebecca's financial expertise turned stolen cash into legitimate investments. Kozlov's chemistry knowledge created products that dominated the market. Nash's technology kept them ahead of every law enforcement agency. But here's what made the Ghost Network different from every other criminal organization. They operated like a technology startup, not a traditional drug cartel. No violence unless absolutely necessary. No territorial disputes with other dealers. No flashy displays of wealth or power. Instead, they used superior products, better distribution networks, and financial sophistication to simply outcompete everyone else. Their meth was purer, their delivery was more reliable, their payment systems were more secure. Dealers switched to Ghost Network products because it meant better profits and less risk. Within 6 months, they controlled drug distribution from Tampa to Miami without firing a single shot. But success built on stolen foundations carries a hidden cost. Antonio found himself managing people who didn't know his real identity, running businesses that required constant lies, maintaining relationships based on deception. Gabriel Torres had friends, business partners, even romantic relationships. But Antonio Mendez was completely alone. The only people who knew the truth were Miguel, Kit, and his new specialists, and even they only knew pieces of the complete picture. The invisible power was intoxicating and isolating in equal measure. Antonio could influence Florida's economy, control criminal enterprises worth hundreds of millions, even affect political campaigns through legitimate business donations. Yet he couldn't have a genuine conversation with another human being. Every interaction was performance, every relationship was strategic, every moment was calculated. He'd achieved something unprecedented, total criminal success with zero criminal profile. Law enforcement couldn't touch Gabriel Torres because Gabriel Torres was a legitimate businessman. They couldn't investigate Antonio Mendez because Antonio Mendez was officially dead. But the Ghost Network's success was attracting attention from unexpected quarters. When you become that powerful, that invisible, that untouchable, eventually, someone notices the absence where a person should be. And that's when the real hunt begins. Agent Kowalski refused to let it go. While her supervisors moved on to new cases, she stayed late every night, spreading surveillance photos across her desk like tarot cards, looking for patterns nobody else could see. Her breakthrough came from the EPA, of all places. Environmental monitors had detected unusual chemical residues in waterways across central Florida. Residues that matched methamphetamine production byproducts. When Kowalski mapped the contamination sites, she saw something that made her blood run cold. The Ghost Network wasn't just one operation. It was dozens. Connected labs scattered across 3 counties, producing product at an industrial scale. Someone was running the most sophisticated drug manufacturing enterprise in FBI history. But every time Kowalski's teams moved on a location, they found empty buildings and a single note, "The ghost was never here." It became a game. Federal agents would spend weeks building cases, gathering evidence, planning raids. They'd hit facilities at dawn with tactical teams and warrants. And they'd find nothing but empty rooms and that same mocking message. Because Antonio had something Kowalski didn't, an informant network that reached into law enforcement itself. Corrupt officials. Former cops drowning in debt. Current agents whose gambling problems made them vulnerable to pressure. Antonio didn't buy their loyalty, he bought their desperation. When raid plans were made, he knew within hours. When surveillance was established, he was already moving operations. When new investigation techniques were developed, he was adapting countermeasures. The psychological warfare was eating both of them alive. Kowalski became obsessed, seeing Ghost Network connections in every case file, every chemical report, every unexplained criminal activity. Her colleagues started avoiding her. Her marriage fell apart. Her career stalled. Antonio wasn't immune either. Constant vigilance was a prison sentence. He couldn't sleep without checking secure communications. Couldn't eat without wondering if someone had recognized him. Couldn't trust anyone completely because trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. But while Kowalski's obsession destroyed her personal life, Antonio's paranoia was building his reputation in the criminal underworld. The ghost of Polk County had become a legend. The man who robbed a cartel and vanished. The criminal who outsmarted the FBI for years. Other criminal organizations started reaching out. Not to challenge him, but to work with him. The Ghost Network became a franchise, providing superior products, money laundering services, and protection from law enforcement to smaller operations across the Southeast. Antonio had achieved something unprecedented. He'd become the criminal world's most trusted contractor while remaining completely invisible to legitimate society. Every failed FBI raid enhanced his reputation. Every empty building they found proved his superiority. Every "ghost was never here" note was advertising for his services. Kowalski knew she was chasing someone extraordinary. Someone who understood law enforcement tactics better than most agents. Someone who could anticipate federal moves weeks in advance. But she also knew something else. Nobody stays invisible forever. Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone has weaknesses. The question was whether she'd find his weakness before the pressure of hunting a ghost destroyed what was left of her sanity. Because in this game, obsession was the only currency that mattered. And both players were paying the same terrible price. By 2020, Antonio Mendez had achieved something that shouldn't exist: perfect criminal success. He'd stolen over $100 million, built an empire worth hundreds of millions more, and remained completely invisible to the people hunting him. But here's the question nobody asks about criminals who win. What exactly did they win? Antonio had money he could never truly spend. Power he could never openly wield. Respect from people who would kill him if they knew the truth. Success that required him to live as someone else forever. The American dream his parents sacrificed everything for? He'd achieved it through the most un-American methods possible. The chemistry degree they'd worked themselves to death to provide? He'd used it to poison communities across Florida. Intelligence without wisdom had led him exactly where it always leads: complete isolation. Because here's what desperation teaches you. When you're drowning, you'll grab onto anything that floats, even if it's an anchor that drags you deeper. Antonio's legitimate talents, his chemistry knowledge, his analytical mind, his ability to see patterns others missed, became weapons that ultimately destroyed the person he was supposed to be. Every short-term solution created bigger long-term problems. Cooking meth to pay student loans led to cartel involvement. Cartel involvement led to the heist. The heist led to living as Gabriel Torres forever. Each solution required bigger lies, more complex deceptions, deeper betrayals. Success built on betrayal is cancer. It spreads. Antonio betrayed the cartel, but that required betraying his own identity. He betrayed his identity, but that required betraying every relationship in his life. Eventually, betrayal becomes the only language you speak. The saddest part? Antonio was brilliant enough to see this happening. Smart enough to understand that every victory was actually a defeat. But by the time you realize you're living in a prison you built yourself, the locks are on the inside. Let me guess. You've just absorbed a masterclass in power, intelligence, and betrayal. And you're still watching anonymously? Legends aren't built on cowardice. Subscribe or scroll down and explain. Why do you refuse to join the people who actually get it? The ghost of Polk County became everything he'd ever wanted to be. Wealthy, powerful, untouchable, respected. But Antonio Mendez, the scared kid whose parents cleaned floors and worked double shifts so he could have a better life, was dead. Killed not by cartel enforcers or FBI raids, but by the very success he'd worked so hard to achieve. That's the real lesson here. It's not about crime or law enforcement or even money. It's about what happens when you use your gifts to become someone you were never meant to be. Because in the end, the person you destroy is always yourself. And once you understand that, you realize why Antonio's story was never going to end with him riding off into the sunset, counting his millions. The ghost was about to discover that some debts can never be paid. 3 years after the heist, the ghost of Polk County had become more than a legend. He'd become a blueprint. Criminal organizations across the country were studying his methods, copying his techniques, trying to recreate his success. But legends attract attention from people you never expect. Foreign intelligence agencies noticed the ghost network's cryptocurrency operations. International banking authorities flagged the Gabriel Torres investment patterns. Rival cartels from Colombia and Russia started asking questions about who was really controlling Florida's drug trade. Most dangerous of all, someone inside the ghost network was getting ambitious. One of Antonio's specialists had started to wonder why they were taking orders from a dead man. Started asking questions about Gabriel Torres's background. Started digging into records that were supposed to be buried forever. Because here's the thing about building an empire on lies. Someone always discovers the truth. And when they do, they have to decide whether to stay loyal or take everything for themselves. Agent Kowalski was still hunting, still obsessed, still following chemical residues and empty buildings. But now she had competition from agencies that played by different rules. Agencies that didn't care about constitutional rights or due process. The question isn't whether Antonio's empire will fall. The question is who will bring it down, and what they'll do with the truth when they find it. Can a ghost remain invisible when the entire world is looking for him? Antonio disappeared. But you're still here. So either subscribe and stay ahead of what happens next, or stay silent and wait to get left behind. Your call. Or your confession.